Welcome to week 3. Activism and ethics. One of the more interesting weeks we'll have this term, especially if you think about some examples of activism in our culture today. Perhaps some of you have experience with activism, either dealing with activists from an organizational standpoint, or perhaps you were an activist against an organization or within a community. Regardless, I think you'll learn a lot about ethics through the lens of activism and other material that we'll study this week. We'll be reading from Fitzpatrick chapter 4. One of the quotes I liked was that many situations seem to demonstrate how organizations were caught off guard and ended up reacting to a situation rather than proactively anticipating and managing activism for the long-term best interest of the organization and the publics involved. When I advise clients in terms of ethical communication or just any kind of communication for most organizations, and we get to that part where we're dealing with emergency response or contingencies, things like that. Sometimes they'll use the term crisis response. I try to avoid that term. A crisis makes it sound like we're out of control or we didn't know this would happen. And I would offer that most organizational leaders know what kind of contingencies they should be prepared for, depending upon what their mission is, where they're located, who their publics are, things like that. And so I encourage you as a public affairs practitioner or as a person in strategic communication, think about within your own organization. What should you be prepared for? How can you proactively prepare your organization from a communication standpoint? And then instead of heading into a crisis, you're developing your contingency plan or emergency response plan or something like that. It's more than semantics because it kind of frames how you'll react in terms of issues that come up when that happens. So that's our text. One of the readings this week is from Vail. The study examines a growing trend of activists using the target organization's social media sites to propagate campaign messages opposing the target organization's practices. Here's your takeaway. Make sure that someone is actively monitoring your social media. Okay, the first time you hear about something that's happening on your social media or about you in social media shouldn't come from an outsider. I've heard of stories where a member of the media contacted an organizational rep, and that's when they learned that someone had been posting things onto that organization's Facebook page or about them on Twitter, things like that. So make sure that you have a monitoring capability. Sometimes if your organization is small enough, it may be you. I've been in places where I'm the person responsible for monitoring that, and there are alerts that you can set up so when someone posts something, you can be alerted to that. Maybe a bigger organization, which I'm in now, we have tools and we have teams, in fact, that monitor social media and then let leaders like me know if there's anything that needs to be, decisions need to be made, or perhaps changes or communication needs to be posted. And then another thing that Vail talked about was that organizations may determine it is not prudent to respond to every criticism or activist threat. And that's true. Carefully balance. Should we engage or should we let it go? Okay. One example is in the Navy, we typically have diversity events on our calendar. And through social media, we'll highlight that. Hispanic Heritage Month, Black History or African American Heritage Month, Asian Pacific Islander Heritage, Women's History, those kinds of things. And for the most part, the responses are very positive. Once in a while, you'll get people that'll come on there and want to display their own politics. And so typically we'll just ignore that. Unless they violate one of our rules of use for social media, we'll typically just let that go. Finally, Weaver just gives us an article where he researched mothers against genetic engineering and how that influenced public opinion and corporate behavior by creating a position of irreconcilable difference between its own position and that of the New Zealand government. Very interesting study. And it'd be interesting to see how you're able to apply that to your own organization, either here in the United States or perhaps if your organization is international. And the other interesting part of this is that the authors call the approach a carnivalesque political protest campaign. That's similar to the medieval carnival folk humor, based on a peculiar and difficult language of laughing people. So kind of a nuanced way of researching communication and ethics. All right, same advice every week. Stay ahead with your assignments, stay engaged in the discussion board, and most importantly, enjoy your time of learning.